Hi, my name is Greg Neagle, and I work for Walt Disney Animation Studios. But before we begin, I just want to take a moment to remember Charles Edge. Charles was a fixture in the Mac admins community. He wrote countless technical books. He was a prolific blog poster. He presented at many, many Mac conferences. And he was co-host of the Mac Admins podcast. And he died unexpectedly in April. I knew Charles for at least 15 years, maybe longer. We saw each other a couple times a year at various conferences. Occasionally we'd talk via email or Slack. He invited me as a guest a couple times on the Mac Admin podcast. And he was always friendly and warm and willing to talk about just about anything at all. I mean, he was a true nerd in the good sense of that word, right? He was very enthusiastic about just all sorts of weird stuff, and very, very smart guy, and I will miss him. All right, now that I've brought the room down, let's talk about the safety features of this auditorium. There's an exit here. There are exits at the rear. Please note that the closest exit to you may be behind you. In the event of a depressurization of the auditorium, oxygen masks will not fall from the ceiling and you're on your own. So make sure your tray tables are stowed and you're sitting up in your seats, and let's get started. Yesterday, or actually it was probably in the middle of the night before that, but Joe Chilcote posted to me on Slack that he had talked on this exact same subject several years ago. So we're just going to watch that. And once you do that, you can go get some more coffee. No, really, I hope that there isn't a huge amount of overlap, and I hope that this is enough of a subject that there's, that it's a big subject and that we won't step on each other's feet too much. And if we do, sometimes repeating is good as well. So open source projects have been useful for Mac admins since at least Apple introduced Mac OS X. There may have been some open source used before that, but it really started coming to the forefront when Apple released OS X. And at Disney Animation, we started at least looking at and playing with OS X in 2001. But it was probably another year or so before we really had users in production running OS X. So when we were ready to sort of roll this out, we had been using, on OS 9, we had been using commercial tools like FileWave and Timbuktu to manage our Macs. And when we were ready to go to OS X, FileWave was not available for OS X. So we had to find some sort of alternative. And I had discovered the Mac Enterprise mailing list that is hosted by Penn State. And it was sort of the precursor of Mac-ended Slack and some of the other ways that we talk now. And there were people there talking about this open source tool called RadMind that they had been using to manage Macs. And so I thought, maybe that's something I should check out. And RadMind was an open source project from the University of Michigan, and it was created by the Unix team there to help them manage their Unix-based server infrastructure. But since OS X is based on Unix at its core, that team was able to port that tool to OS X and show that they could use it to manage Macs as well. And the great thing is, since RadMind was open source, I could download it and start playing with it and start figuring out if we could use it for our needs at Disney Animation without all the overhead of having to figure out how to do an eval with a commercial vendor. There's a lot of approvals and stuff that have to go on with that. This is something I basically, in an afternoon, I'll just download it and start playing with it. And I quickly discovered that there was a community around RadMind. The developers were available. There were people that were already using it. And from that community, I got a level of support that frankly was better than what I had been getting or what I'd expect to be getting from commercial vendors at that time. And I'll say this again because I think it's really important. Even though that was open source software, I was getting very, very good support. You don't people sometimes think, well, if it's open source, you're kind of on your own. You know, if you want support, you've got to pay a vendor. And that's not always the case. There are communities around open source that sometimes are far more responsive than commercial vendors. Not all are that way, but in this case it was. And we successfully used Radmine to manage our OS X machines for several years. And in that same time period, you know, in the early days of Mac OS X, there were several other useful open source tools that were developed or ported to the Mac. There's a few here. This doesn't cover them all, but this is a few. But as OS X changed and our needs at Disney Animation changed, it became clear that Radmine was really no longer the best fit for our needs. And I looked at commercial tools once again, but I had made a key mistake. My timing was wrong. I was limited by the budget cycle. Unfortunately, I had come to this realization that Radmine wasn't going to work for us anymore, too late to get funding for a commercial replacement into the current budget cycle. So I was going to have to wait at least a year, maybe more, before I would get funding for a tool to replace Radmine. And at about that same time, my manager came to our team and said, you guys all need to learn Python. And up until that point, most of the systems administration scripting that I and my team had been doing were in Shell or even in Perl, a lot of Perl. So I didn't know Python, but Python is used a lot in the visual effects industry and in digital animation on the production side. It's the key scripting engine behind Maya and a few of the other important tools. And so there was a lot of Python use at the studio, just not in our team. And so our manager thought, you know, it would be a really good idea for us all to be sort of on the same page, that we can share ideas, we can share code, we can help each other out if we're all using Python instead of some of us using Python, some of us using Perl, that sort of thing. And I had also recently learned about the Python to Cocoa bridge, which is also known as PyObjective-C, largely via Nigel Kirsten and Chris Adams. They had a project called, at the time, they called it PyMacAdmin. And PyObjective-C is a way you can use a scripting language like Python to call Apple's frameworks. And so it allowed you to do cool stuff with a scripting language that previously you would have needed to use a compiled language like Objective-C to access. So this is getting interesting to me. But in order to learn a new language, a new computer language, I have to have a project. I can't just, you know, sit and read documentation and it just comes to me. I have to try to build something and fail and figure out what I did wrong and go back and, you know, copy code from somebody else and paste it in and see how it works. But I need to build something. So put all that together. I had this crazy idea. I need a new tool to replace Radmine. I need to learn Python. Ooh, this PyObjective-C stuff looks really fun and cool. What if I, as part of learning Python, write something to replace Radmine? So I wrote Monkey to learn Python. And that is why the Python in Monkey is so terribly, terribly bad. I was a novice, right? And I started work on this crazy idea in 2008. And at the Macworld conference in 2009, January 2009, I was talking to Nigel Kirsten, who was a Mac admin for Google at the time. And I showed him what I was working on. And he was interested, but he suggested, hey, you should make this open source. You should put this out on an open source website. He suggested code.google.com. And maybe we should get a mailing list going and that sort of thing. So other people can look at it and other people can contribute, but he really wanted to look at it and he really wanted to contribute. But the goal being that I'm working on this tool, but maybe we could eventually develop it into something that other people could use. So my next task was to get approval to make this project open source. This was 2009. It was really difficult back then. That was it. Do it now, and there would be like, you know, four weeks of meetings, and legal would get involved, and it would take forever. But back then, we were all younger and stupider, and we just went, yeah, let's do it. But why did I want to make it open source? Key reasons are I wanted to be able to collaborate with people that weren't in my organization. I was the main person doing Mac stuff at the time. There were a few other people that were doing some as well, but nobody was really doing any sort of like scripting or coding. They were doing more support type stuff. So it was really just me in terms of being able to write this and that sort of thing. So I wanted to be able to collaborate with other people. I wanted to be able to bounce ideas off. I wanted people to help me out with stuff. And also, I wanted it to have access to environments that were different from mine. Google had a much, much larger environment than ours, like 6 figures of Macs. And so being able to have access to more brains, more people, a wider variety of environments, I knew then that Monkey would get better, faster that way than if I was just working on it by myself, or with maybe 1 or 2 other people inside my own company. It just felt like that was the right thing to do. So by the middle of January, we had Monkey on code.google.com, created a mailing list, and people started talking about it in public. And I got feedback very, very early on. And, within another year or so, I actually got confident enough to merge somebody else's code into the project. So let's fast forward to today. Nearly 100 people have contributed to code to Monkey. And even more have contributed documentation, reported issues, contributed ideas that led to new features or enhancements, or offered tools that extend what Monkey can do. But more importantly, Monkey isn't the only tool of interest to Mac admins. In the years since Monkey has been released, there's been an explosion of open source tools. And here are some of them. And you may have no use for Monkey in your organization, but I bet there's at least one tool up there that could, if it doesn't now, it could help you in some way if you knew about it. So let's say you've now found an open source tool and you're using it and it's really helping you as a Mac admin, but you find a bug. What can you do? We'll skip the first 2 options here, and let's focus on a couple others that might be a little bit more productive. Let's talk about bug reports. And I don't want to give you a list of like rules or this is what you have to do for a good bug report or a good pull request, but some tips maybe that I've learned over time when I've done bug reports or pull requests, or when people have submitted them to me, just things I've learned to look for. First thing, explain what you think is wrong. So sometimes it may not be obvious, or it may be obvious, but better to over-explain than under-explain what you think is wrong. And describe a way you can cause that wrong behavior to occur. So whoever you're reporting it to, they're going to have a much easier time figuring out the bug if they can actually reproduce it. If they're not seeing it, it's really hard to fix. Other bits of information, really important. What version of this software do you see the bug in? Is it new? Did it happen in previous versions of the software? That can help us narrow down where maybe there was a code change that triggered this bug. If we knew it doesn't happen in version X, but it does happen in version Y, we can look at those changes. And other information that can help. Screenshots could be very helpful, or screen capture movies, or bits of the log output, or verbose output. Anything that helps point to where the bug might be occurring. And here's an example of a good bug report. So Vaughn shows us the unexpected behavior. He saw that the restart action that Monkey import was generating for a package had like unexpected text in it. He expected it to be, the restart action should say like none, or restart required, or shutdown required, that sort of thing. And instead it had all this garbage text in it. He explains how to reproduce it. It happens when using Monkey import with bundle style packages, big clue, in macOS 14.4, another big clue. And he tells us what versions of Monkey he can reproduce it in. So it's a couple versions, so maybe it has nothing to do with the Monkey code itself. Maybe it was a change in 14.4 that triggers this. Finally, he shows us how we can get the installer to output the exact same text that he's seeing unexpectedly in the restart action. So all this is really helpful in understanding the issue. It gave me enough info to clearly understand the problem, how to reproduce it myself, and even a helpful suggestion where I could look for the source of the problem. And as it turned out, starting in Mac OS 14.4, Apple's installer warns that bundle style packages will not be supported in a future version of Mac OS. But Apple did something really weird here, and instead of writing that message to standard error, they wrote it to standard out, right before they also output the expected value. So Monkey was just reading the output from this command. Apple had written garbage text, so Monkey just put the garbage text right in the reply. So given all that information, it was easy for me to understand the issue. I then had to just change the code to reparse that and throw the garbage text away. And a few days later, I was able to commit a fix. Now, as an aside, you should pay attention to this deprecation warning, because you have exactly one guess as to what version the future version of macOS refers to. 15. Here's another example. Here, Tony tells me he's seeing an issue that started after he updated to Monkey 6.5.1. He explains the unexpected behavior. He expects to see catalog information in the managed installs info.p list, and he doesn't anymore. Even better, he shows me what he saw with Monkey 6.5.1 in comparison with what he saw with Monkey 6.5.0. And the detail he includes makes it really clear exactly what he means when he says, I'm not seeing this catalog info. There's no room for misinterpretation here. He's showing it very clearly. So after I looked at the code and after some discussion back and forth, I figured out what the problem was, and I committed a fix to the GitHub repo. And Tony tested my fix, and he reported back that it now behaved as he expected. And that's a really important part of the whole bug report process as well. Testing and providing feedback on proposed fixes. It's really, really helpful to the person who's tried to fix it to get confirmation from somebody else that, yes, this does fix the bug that I saw. Now, another way you might handle a bug is to fix it yourself. In fact, that would be a great way for you to handle a bug. And then you can create what's called a pull request with your changes. And I have some tips here too. You should aim to make your pull request as easy to understand as possible. You probably want to communicate a lot of the same information you might have with a bug report. Make that fix as concise as possible. Don't fall into the temptation of, hey, while I'm in here, why don't I clean up all this other stuff I don't like? That can make the bug, a pull request, kind of unwieldy and hard to understand what's going on if there's unrelated changes. And if it's applicable, it can be really helpful to show sort of a before and after. Here's what happens before this change. Here's what happens after this change is implemented. And in this example, Elliot Jordan is simply fixing some typos in the code. We can click on Files Changed, and we can see, yep, exactly what was changed. It's just some misspellings or typos. And it doesn't actually change the behavior of the code. He's just fixing some function names and some documentation text to get rid of some typos. So nothing visible to users. It doesn't change the behavior of the code. Still, it's a valuable fix. Anytime you can clean up little mistakes like this, it's appreciated. Another example. In this one, I wasn't quite sure what the reason for this proposed change was. Was he fixing a bug? What's going on? So I asked him. And this is really important. I can't tell you how many PRs I've closed. Well, I probably could. But I have definitely closed PRs because the person who opened it did not answer any questions I had. You know, they proposed something and I asked them a question, radio silence. Well, after a couple of weeks of not hearing back, just close it. So it's got to be a two-way street of communication. In this case, he did respond right away. He explained that he was actually having a problem with Jamf Connect and he was trying to work around it. I had a few more questions and concerns because I wanted to make sure that this change didn't break. He might have fixed his problem with Jamf Connect, but it had the potential of breaking other things. And so we kind of played around a bit and tested some variations and some questions that I had. But the changes themselves are pretty simple and straightforward. And once my questions and concerns were addressed, it was pretty easy to merge. Pull requests can also be used to add new features. And I do want to encourage you to contribute to open source. So again, I don't want to give you a big list of rules or do's and don'ts, but again, here's a few tips. Number one, before you spend a lot of time working on something new, start a discussion with the maintainers or the community. You don't want to, it could be so crushing. You work, so you have this, you're super excited, you've got this idea, you work on it for a couple of weeks, and then you send in this pull request, and the maintainer's like, that's really not a direction we were interested in going. You could have saved yourself a lot of time and effort if you had just mentioned it ahead of time and see if it is something that the maintainer would accept. Wes was talking to me last night at Steamworks about a thing he wants to do with Monkey, and he did the right thing. He asked me ahead of time so he doesn't spend a bunch of time working on something that I'm going to go on. And I went, but at least, you know, at least he isn't completely shut down. But that's important. And a huge set of changes can be really intimidating. If somebody gives me a pull request and it's like just hundreds and hundreds of lines of code and changes sprinkled all over files all over the place, am I going to have the time to really like dig into it and figure out what's going on? I might like kind of just set it off to the side. So a smaller pull request is going to get faster attention probably from maintainers because it's something that they can look at quickly and see, you know, understand what you're doing very quickly and then decide, you know, how to react to that. And always remember that the maintainers, they're under no obligation to merge your changes. It is their project, and they can kind of decide. I mean, they may have different ideas about where the project should go, but even more importantly, they may be concerned about the support burden for something new that is added. If it's something that they aren't going to personally use, but it looks like it's fairly complex and will add a lot of support, questions or that sort of thing, you know, they could decide, yeah, this is really not something I feel comfortable adding because this is just going to make it hard for me to support it going forward. That's not necessarily a reflection on the quality of your code or the quality of your idea. It's just a sort of a trade-off that the maintainers have to make in terms of, is this something that I feel like I can support going forward? All right, so let's look at an example of a pull request that adds a new feature. And here, Steve Kung added a missing delete manifest option to the command line tool called manifest util. Now, I had intended to support manifest deletion. There's a to-do up there. I just had never quite gotten around to implementing. So Steve decided, I'm going to implement it. And this is where it's great to have people contribute things. Sometimes there are things that the maintainers intend to do and just haven't gotten around to or just haven't been motivated to finish. If you see that, you see a to-do in the code, that's an excellent thing to jump on because, you know, if the maintainers have put to-do, I want to do this thing, you've got a pretty good indication that they'll probably accept your change if you actually complete the thing that they intended to do. And Steve's change was only about 30 lines of code. It added a feature that had already been planned, so this was really an easy thing to merge. Now, let's look at a counterexample where a pull request, it could use some improvements in order to be accepted. In 2020, Anthony Reimer gave a talk at the Penn State MacAdmins, the Penn State campfire sessions. During the pandemic, they just did these as sort of like Zoom meetings or Teams, or I don't remember which technology they used, but they were not in person, they were remote. But part of this talk was what he learned making pull requests. And I chatted with Anthony last week, and he's okay with me resharing this story. He wanted to fix a typo in the description text for the app package creator processor in AutoPackage. He just wanted to add a missing space in the description, which that sounds like a really simple change, adding one space. Unfortunately, when he made his PR, he had been using a Git repo that he'd already been playing around with. He made some changes and reverted them and did a bunch of stuff. So when he made the PR, all of those commits came along. And so there were 6 commits to add one space to the documentation. And so that PR sat there for several months, possibly because of that fact. And then he decided, I'm going to add some more stuff to that PR. And for whatever reason, I finally noticed the PR. Maybe he pinged me or something. I actually don't remember the details here. But I was just confused by all the noise. There's like 7 commits here, the space here, different files are being modified. I just didn't understand that. And so he started over. Poor guy. He was working hard. But this time, there was a single commit for his proposed change. And there it is. He also opened a separate PR for his proposed changes to the package root creator processor. So small focus change, it was very easy to merge then. Now, before you file a bug or submit a PR, you might want to take a look to see if the project has any sort of guidelines for contributing. Because if you follow those guidelines, it's probably going to save everyone time and frustration. Monkey has a page on contributing. AutoPackage has a page on how to share recipes. And by the way, sharing AutoPackage recipes you've wrote is an excellent way to contribute to AutoPackage. So it's more than just the AutoPackage code. AutoPackage only becomes much more valuable the more recipes that are available. So that's a key way to contribute to AutoPackage. And I just want to take 1 second to mention this. The examples I've presented so far have been for open source projects hosted on GitHub, but that's not the only place that you can have things. There are other project hosting sites. Joel Rennick, for example, hosts a lot of his projects up on GitLab. And Git isn't the only source control or option out there. There are other things, Mercurial and CVS, and is it CVS? That's a pharmacy. But SVN, that's what. And Perforce, I think it's a commercial one, which probably wouldn't be used in an open source context. But the ideas are the same. No matter the hosting site or the technology being used to manage the source, the basic ideas are the same. So I've been talking very abstractly about making pull requests, but if you've never done one ever, this might be super intimidating to get started. So I thought I would go through a live example of how we can add a new feature to Monkey and do a pull request to get that added. And it's helpful if you have some familiarity with Git, but I'm not going to get very deep into Git commands, so hopefully, even if you're not familiar with Git, you'll get the basic ideas here. All right. No, I didn't want to do that. Let's do... Good. And yes, good. All right. So this is the Monkey site on GitHub. I'm going to steal my notes that are on my phone here so that, no, I don't want to log into the captive Wi-Fi portal. Don't care. Use without internet, fine. All right. Let's go to the terminal here, and let's take a look at a behavior right now. So if I do sudo managed software update, the first thing that gets printed is a sort of welcome message. It says managed software update tool, tells me when the copyright is, who cares, and gives me a URL to the project. Wouldn't it be nice if the version information was in there? Like if it said managed software update version, whatever the version is. That's certainly more useful than knowing what the copyright date is for the software. So let's add that. Let's add version number output to the welcome message of managed software update. So going back to the Monkey website, we need to have a local copy of the code that we can play with. Now I could go here and clone the code locally, but that's going to run into a problem later, because if I clone code from the Monkey project website, local, make changes, I don't have, well, I actually do. You probably don't have push access to push that code back. You want to be able to make a pull request, and you need to do that from your own sort of fork of the code. So what we actually want to do first is we want to fork this project. So we've got this little fork button up here. You hit that, and it asks, okay, it's going to go into, instead of being under the monkey organization, it's going to go into my personal space. So you do have to have a GitHub account to do this, but I have a space, and it's going to name it monkey. If you already have one, you could change the name. If you already have a monkey project in your little corner of GitHub. So we'll hit create fork, and we have a little fun little animation. We'll wait. It should only take a few seconds. I hope that's true. Good. So now we have our own copy of the monkey repo in your own corner. So it's in Greg Neagle in this case. So it's my own copy. Now I can get a local copy of that. So if I go under this code thing, I can copy the URL, and I can go back to the terminal here, and let's see where we are. Let's cd. Okay, so I made myself a workspace here called MacDevOpsYVR24, and what we're going to do is we're going to use the git clone command. Let's zoom this a little better there. I'm going to do the git clone command and paste that URL. What this does is it tells Git to make a local copy of that code from the GitHub repo onto my local machine. Now let's hope that the internet gods shine or smile upon us. See how long this takes. Shouldn't take too long. But it's copying not only all the current code, but like all the history too. So there we are. So now there's a monkey directory inside my workspace here. We're going to take that directory. I'm going to drag it onto a text editor. And let's zoom that a bit. I don't want to do a full screen. Is it option to do zoom? There we go. So we'll go under code, client. I'm cheating because I know where some of this stuff is. There's the managed software update script right there. All right. So that's the actual tool that runs when you run managed software update. Now let's go back quickly to terminal. What we're looking for, we're going to add version in here. So let's look for that text in the code. So I'll do find, paste that. Well, that looks right because we see there's these print statements here. It's printing exactly what we saw there. So what we really want to do is in here, print. And for whatever reason, you'll notice these other print statements, they're using single, who's they, using single quotes around stuff. So let's just be nice and use the same style. I adopted that style back when Google was working on the project with me. Apparently that was a style in their code. They always used single quotes because it was easier to type a single quote because they don't have to use the shift key. And so, productivity. All right, so we've made a very real basic change here. I'm going to save that, and then let's try running it. So I got a CD to that same monkey client, code client, and I'm gonna run monkey Python. Dang it! If I could spell, okay, there we go. Manage software update. Of course, I must run it as root. Actually, let's get this up to the top so that's clear. Sudi. So, okay, good. We found the right place to make this change. We did that right. Let's put the actual version in there because that's kind of silly that way. So we're going to go back again to our code. And I don't know how to print version. Let's just type version and see what we can find in here. Ooh, that looks interesting. Manage install version, info get version. Let's look again. Oh, okay, there's a version flag. Wow. That looks exactly like what we want here. Print info get version. All right, so let's, no, don't do that. Thank you for looking that up for me. Oh my gosh. What is, there we go. So got that. I don't remember where that stupid thing we just did was, so we'll just find it again. There we go. So version. This is Python. This is one of the 400 ways you can interpolate strings in Python. This is one of the older ones. Since this project dates back to 2008, it uses this older version throughout the code. Python 3 has a much cleaner, nicer way to interpolate. I won't get into that, but if you're asking why is Greg using this old crappy way, I want it to at least be consistent. Someday we'll go through and fix it all and make it modern and shiny and new, but have not done that. All right, so version, and it'll interpolate is the fancy word there, the version, and it'll replace that sort of %s with what comes out of there. So save. Let's go back to terminal, and let's try that again. Okay, great. So we have Managed Software Update Tool version 6.5.1. So we got what we wanted. Excellent. Let's see what we can do to make this. I don't want to finish that. Lovely. Let's now start making our pull request. Not clean. I'm going to use the get status command, and that's going to tell me what's changed. It tells me other things, but the main thing I want to know is what's changed here. And you'll see modified managed software update by .py. That was the file we changed, so that makes sense. And if I say get diff, it can show me the exact change inside that file. So I'm not an expert at reading diff style output, but this seems pretty clear. You know, it just shows us in green there. We've added a line. So that looks exactly what we want. So I want to add that file to our commit. So I say git add that file. Good. And we could add multiple files but we're only changing one. So we're ready now to add this into a commit. So we type git commit and then -m gives us a chance to put a commit message in. There's other ways to do it, but this is quick and dirty. So we're going to say add version info to welcome message. Excellent. If I type get status again, nothing to commit, working tree clean. My branch is ahead by one commit, so I'm going to push that. Now remember, I'm working with not the main monkey repo, but my own fork. So when I push this, when I push this, it's pushing up to the Greg Neagle copy of the monkey repo. So let's go back to Safari. Let's get out of there. I'm going to refresh, Command R, and this branch is one commit ahead of monkey.main. It shows right now there was a commit added. And look, that's exactly what we saw in that diff. That's good. So we can now click this contribute button and open a pull request. And this is going to take what's in Greg Neagle monkey and make a pull request for the main monkey repo. It suggests a nice little title for us based on that message. And I could be really nice here and say this adds version info to managed software updates welcome message. And let's take some of my advice here and say show what before looks like. What did it look like? Let me scroll. Hello? Yeah, we'll just cheat. Let's just run it again. There we go. So that's what it looked like before. And after. I'll just do it this way too. Yeah, hitting Command C kill was not a good idea here, but because so much garbage goes to the screen. Okay, that's good enough. So we need that text there. Good. And let's do a preview. Looks great. I can click Create Pull Request. And now it switched me over to the main monkey repo, and here's this pull request. So I, as a contributor, if I'm like, or I'm the maintainer, and I go under pull, I see, oh, there's some pull requests here. Hey, look, there's this new one here. Click it, I read it, I'm taking a look at the files that are changed, and I can decide whether to accept it or not. So let's go to the conversation, and okay, so that we did not accept that. That was that. All right. So that was a really basic look at making a small contribution to an open source project. I hope that demystified some of the mystery around it. And maybe you're thinking, I'd really like to contribute, but I don't know how to code in Python or Swift or Objective-C or Go or any of those things. But there are still ways you can contribute to open source projects. There isn't a single open source project that couldn't benefit from more and better documentation. GitHub wikis generally are editable by anybody. I don't know about GitLab and some of the other hosting sites, but if it's not editable, you can always ask the contributor, hey, I've got some ideas for fixing up the documentation. Can you let me contribute? If you're going to do really major reorganization of the documentation, you might want to talk to the maintainers before you start doing that. But even adding here's how a page that describes something that you were able to do with the software that's that other people might have questions about, documenting that is great. You can also help out an open source project by helping other users. Probably when you first started using many of these open source projects, you had questions and you asked those questions and you got help. But now that you know more, you can sort of pass that knowledge along and help others. Time you contribute to helping new users is time the maintainers can use to continue to work on and improve the project. The Alan here that's very, very helpful is Alan Su, who is right here in the audience. He's actually one of the really excellent helper guys on the monkey mailing list. He helps a lot, and I greatly appreciate it. Thank you, Alan. And finally, most open source projects welcome engagement. It's a lot more fun and satisfying and rewarding to work on a project that people are talking about, that have opinions about, that people are posting questions about, that people are using, rather than a project that it's just like dead. You don't hear anything, you don't know if anybody's using it, nobody's talking about it. We want to hear. And don't underestimate the value of just a simple message of encouragement or appreciation. Those can go a long ways as well. That's it. Thank you.